personal growth space available immediately. And other intriguing topics will be on today's Intentional Clinician episode with Eli Bedrosian LPC. Eli earned his master's in professional counseling from Grand Canyon University in Arizona. He completed his counseling internship at the famous Meadows Clinic, and he worked 4 years there in various roles as a therapist. The focus of his program at the Meadows was working with the family of origin and supporting people in healing from trauma and recovering from various addictions. He then worked at psychological counseling services for around 6 years. There, he focused on trauma and addiction as well, and also worked on treating specifically sexual compulsivity. He is a somatic experience practitioner and an EMDR therapist. He is currently working on becoming a sex therapist and training through the University of Michigan. He is a licensed professional counselor for about 11 years, and he has been in private practice for the last year. He sees individuals, couples, and families at the Biltmore Wellness Collective in the Biltmore neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona. I really think you're going to like Eli's perspectives on guilt as evidence of progress, mental health hygiene, and trauma and addiction, among other topics. If you are a private practice therapist or a small group and are looking for ethical, efficient, and excellent billing services, look no further than Therapist Billing Services, LLC. Therapist Billing Services was a billing company made by therapists for therapists. It's www.therapistbillingservicesllc.com. I'm Paul Krauss, and you are listening to the Intentional Clinician podcast. Now let's get to the interview. Welcome, Eli Bedrosian LPC, to the Intentional Clinician podcast.
Thanks. Hey, thanks for having me on, Paul.
Hey, my pleasure. And yeah, I've gotten to know you a little bit over the last year or so as we have been sharing some office space when I'm in town at the Biltmore Wellness Collective in Phoenix, Arizona. Mm-hmm. And as I read your bio earlier, you are now in private practice full-time.
Correct.
At the Biltmore Wellness Collective, and you got your own site as well, which I'll put in the notes. So I'm excited to ask you about a few concepts here. We were talking about what we might want to talk about in a podcast, and you talked about 3 concepts plus some of the techniques you utilize, like EMDR and Somatic Experience, that we're going to talk about. So just this is for therapists or clients or anybody out there that's interested in mental health and personal growth. You had this idea about personal growth space available immediately.
Right.
Can you tell me exactly what you mean about that? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, in some ways, it's a slightly different way of talking about, I think a lot about what's actually out there, just as far as, we're all unfinished products. And personal growth space immediately is just kind of a slightly different way of my saying, are we having the awareness in the moment of these opportunities for growth, right? Sort of where are the tension spots in my life? What do I know that my struggles are? And as things are coming up in my life, just kind of in a dynamic fashion, here's a chance for me to grow. And a lot of times the growth opportunities don't feel real great, right? And that's why it's a growth opportunity. It's something that we maybe haven't quite yet faced, or we haven't quite yet mastered to a point where we're sort of more comfortable with it. So that's sort of what that's what the sort of overarching idea behind personal growth space immediately is about.
Okay, so like basically what I'm hearing is like we can all identify like a small space in our life where we know we might need to make some changes, even whether we're in therapy or not in therapy. And basically what I'm hearing with that is it's uncomfortable to change. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think it's often uncomfortable to change, right? And I think part of the framework with this is that we're patterned creatures, right? We're creatures of habit. And so learning what our patterns are, what our habits are, what is helping us, what is our strengths, and then this sort of age-old idea of this is how I've adapted to get to this point in different ways. Some of them I'm aware of, some of them I'm not aware of. And are these adaptations serving me now, right, in my current life, as my relationships are, as my job situation, my family situation? Are they serving me now? And so there's this sort of ongoing opportunity to be looking at that as things come up in the moment. And then am I choosing to take that challenge? Am I choosing to go in a slightly different direction than what I know and what is instilled in me already as habit?
Yeah, absolutely. When you said adaptation and habit, those are two words I kind of want to talk about. So we adapt. So like we're a little baby and we scream to get milk or be fed, or our diapers changed. And as we get older, we develop language, and we sort of, learn how to navigate the family environment that we may be in, or social environments. And then we continue to learn, and school is of course supposed to help us with all of this, and hopefully our surroundings. But when you mean adaptation, there's lots of ways to adapt. So when you said it's no longer serving us, might make a bad habit. Could you give us an example of somebody who maybe they had something in their life that was like really good and helped them kind of overcome a milestone or a situation in their life, and then later on in life maybe that wasn't working for them anymore, and they had to like adapt again, I guess is what you would say?
Right. Yeah. I mean, so there's so many different examples. I think that addiction, oftentimes was some type of adaptive response, right? Not the addiction itself, meaning sort of like, I can't stop doing this behavior or this substance, but more whatever the behavior substance was, to quell or to soothe or to come down or to get up, from an activation standpoint. In my environment, in my circumstance, maybe like, for example, alcohol was something that a person uses to just to survive, just to sort of block out the immediate overwhelming pain or overwhelming circumstances that are there. And then, of course, years later, after it has become, let's say, it becomes an addiction where they just can't stop. Is it then serving them, as their life circumstances change? Let's say they make it out of whatever the overwhelming situation is, they start a family of their own, so on and so forth. Let's say they're, the person is successful, but now the alcohol is starting to get in the way of their relationship with their spouse. Now the alcohol is starting to get in the way of their effectiveness or their sharpness at work, with the relationship with their kids. And so this sort of reevaluation of, okay, so this is not serving me. So compulsive behaviors, compulsive use of substances is one example. Reactivity, something that seems like, oh man, this person is just an angry person. They're just an angry dude. You can't seem to, cast that, I think, is another example of an adaptation, because in their environment, when they grew up somewhere, somehow that served them, that fit them. And maybe it was sort of like, I'm going to back people off and hold this wall of anger so that I don't get hurt more than I already have been, right? So I think that's another sort of angle and just thing to be considering, is that even when people have ways of being that are really affrontive or offensive to us in different ways, not that it justifies bad behavior, but also we want to keep in mind, and somewhere in their lives, currently or in the past, it was serving them, because if not, it wouldn't be there, right?
Right. Sort of like how certain mammals, they take different routes to go get their food, like maybe like some sort of raccoon or something. And then
Yes.
If something gets in their way, or there's, a road built in there or something like that, they may have to take a different way. They're adapting, right? Or if the winter thaws everything out, they may dig up their food earlier or move to a different tree. So you're saying, with like alcohol or anger or different things like that, for a while, maybe something like that helped us through a situation that we felt that was a good idea. And now It's starting to cause an impact, a negative impact on our behavior. And it takes, I guess the hard part is, how do you, What if somebody thinks, well, this is just the way I am, and these are my
Yeah.
habits, and I don't care, and you can't tell me what to do, family. Like,
Yeah.
does somebody need therapy to kind of figure out and reflect, or
Send them to therapy, force the therapy out of them.
Right.
I also think that, people are, they come to things when they're ready. Right. And so therapy has much less of a stigma. I think, I've been in private practice, been licensed, I think approximately 11 years. I think that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And there's much less of a stigma now, like 10 plus years later. And yet there's still a stigma, about it as far as, what does this mean? Does this mean that I'm weak? Does it mean I'm messed up in my brain, that I need to go and talk? Like, don't I know myself well enough that, right? So do they need therapy? Well, I think given the right therapist, it's the right match, it's something that can be helpful.
Okay. Yeah. So there's still a stigma that says, like, if I'm going to therapy, then means something's wrong with me. Right. There must be a
problem.
So.
What do you think, Paul? What do you think about that?
Well, I do think that there are in many circles, they are definitely a stigma for sure. And I think that has to do with ignorance and pride. I think that, if your arm was broken, people would think you're the biggest idiot in the world for not going into the doctor and getting your arm set back and the bone to heal properly. So if something really, oftentimes when people come into therapy, it's because something is happening in their life that sucks, right? It's not because they suck. It's because something happened, like a relationship issue or a job issue or a substance issue or a trauma or all of a sudden they can't sleep very well, or they're worried all the time, or an economic issue brings them into therapy. And that doesn't mean something's wrong with you. So I feel like that's part of the human problem we run into, the human condition, is that we seem to associate everything that happens with us with our identity. Instead of, if you live to be 80 or 90 years old, you can pretty much guarantee there are going to be economic problems. There's going to be some type of family problem. There will be a government problem. There will be friend problems, because that is how this world exists. And the hard part is, I think children in schools and a lot of parents don't teach their children about reality. And so then they get out there on their own at 18. They've got a sort of delusional view of how things work. So I think some of that comes from that. And also, when a pride and ignorance is usually surrounded by more pride and ignorance. So there's usually a social group that says, if you go to therapy, you're weak or something like that. And really, being able to reflect and look at your life actually makes you stronger mentally. And going to therapy and saying, I don't really want to work on this. I don't really want to talk about this. I don't really want to think about this, but I'm going to do it anyway, actually makes you a stronger person. You have to be vulnerable to be able to be strong. So if you look at really good leaders who are respected, a lot of them have gone to therapy or done some sort of coaching or done some sort of self-help, because they have to evolve or adapt with the people they're leading. And the leaders who get maligned in the news, or their company crumbles, or they have a bad reputation, often they don't like, they probably would say, I don't go to therapy. Why would I ever do that? I'm good enough the way I am. I'm strong. I made this all myself. And that is what I would call a stunted, myopic, and narrow view of reality. And so, I think anybody can change if their conditions are right, and if their willingness is right, and if they've got the right help. So some people might just need a book, right? Or they might just need a podcast, and they might be like, all right, I'm going to change this thing, right? Other people need accountability, a friend or a mentor. Other people need a therapist because there's so many blocks and troubles that have happened emotionally or mentally that they need to come to us. So I think in terms of your concept, anybody, if we really set our mind to it and we have the right help and the right conditions, anybody can change something in their life, small at least. When it comes to big things, I think you need a bit more help often. I think it's a rare day that somebody revolutionizes and changes their entire life on their own. I think that's a bit of a myth, because humans are very social creatures. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, totally. Social creatures. And let me just circle back just for a moment, just to touch on your point about, people becoming over-identified with this is just the way that I am. And I think sometimes it's about fear, about I've adapted in a certain way, and it's fearful for me to change or for me to be different because perhaps I'll be less protected. People don't, often say that, or there's just not a willingness to do the hard work that change often requires. Which is understandable too, right? None of us like discomfort. Back to the idea of, all of us are social creatures, 100%, absolutely. Group mentality, so much of the way that we live, the way that we our desires and motivations, aspirations are tied to our relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that completely. And I think, just like if you go to the gym and you start running or lifting weights, your body is going to hurt because there's micro tears in your muscle. And I also heard actually there's micro breaks in your bone that actually strengthen your bones. So just like that in nature, why wouldn't working on your mental health cause micro tears in your psyche or your behavior or your stress level? Why wouldn't that occur? So we have to, why? So I think that's when the ego and sort of cultural language and cultural topics that are lacking nuance and critical thought sort of get in our way, right? Little slogans get in our way. So yeah, I think that's a good point about that. We've kind of made our point there. Good mental health hygiene.
Yeah.
This is one of the things you talk about a lot, and I wanted to know kind of what your thoughts are on that, and maybe I'll ask more questions about that. We'll just start in general.
Yeah. Good mental hygiene. So this is just the idea that there is a hygiene required for all of our different brains, and our brains are wired differently. And so what is a good set of hygiene habits for one person may not be the exact right set of hygiene habits for another person. What I mean is, if we sort of look at this from a standpoint of just activation, what is stimulating, what is deactivating, or what is a way for me to self-calm or nurturing, and just having awareness of what are my needs through the day, right? And I think just as sort of a quick example of that, I think there's a lot of times when we are the way our culture is right now, we're set up for a lot of stimulation. You swipe here, you look at this, here's another video here, you hop on social media here, and there's a lot of intensity and there's a lot of activation that our brains are just sort of used to at this point. And if that's serving you, then wonderful. And if there's some point where you're saying, man, maybe my screen time is a bit high, maybe I need to get out a little bit more and move my body, that's where, some of these ideas may come into play as far as what is a good, what's a good day for me, as far as maybe I get up, maybe I get myself to the gym, because there's an activating thing where I move my body, but it's in a really positive, in a positive way. Maybe I have a stressful day at work, I need to unwind. Well, how do I unwind? Well, maybe being in the pool is something. I think 5 senses are something really important just to be paying attention to. And some of us are more sensitive to any one or a combination of those senses than somebody else maybe. The nature of our relationships is something that has really big factors as far as, regulation or being dysregulated. What else? Just practices. So it might be yoga, it might be journaling, it might be meditation. What are my practices for taking care of myself, where I feel like there's a ground beneath me? I think it's so easy in our culture to kind of get swept away in doing and achievement and not feeling good enough and deep into the social media rabbit holes to the point where, we're feeling lost, and so just this idea of good mental hygiene around, well, on a daily basis, what's the right mix? What's the right balance of things? And that can be dynamic for a person, different phases of their life.
Yeah. So I think what I'm hearing again is like reflecting on what you actually do with your time.
Yes.
So there's a fun activity you can do on your phone where you go to settings somewhere and you look up your screen time and look up what apps you use. You can actually set limits on the new iPhone. I'm not sure what everyone's phone are, but you can actually set limits on your apps. You can look and see what your activity's like when your screen's on. What are you mostly on? And I can see here, it says Gmail, 8 minutes. I just looked at my phone. Uh-oh. That's on my phone, too. That's not even on my computer. Notes, 8 minutes. I won't even get into the rest of it. But the point is that what are we actually doing to track our time? Because all of these devices, the news, the radio, billboards, computers, TV, they all want our time. And they want our time usually for quite specific processes, which are eventually either mining our data for money or taking our money or making us aware of something that we will then spend money on. Okay. A lot of it goes there. Some of it's informational, but, if we aren't using our body is going to respond in a certain way. It's very simple biology and physics, but we don't often think about this because I never had a health class that talked about this. They just would say, exercise is good for you. Exercise is good for me. If you don't exercise, you die, actually. Like, you have to walk. You have to move around. Your systems will shut down one by one. If you just sit inside. Like, I've watched there's the reality shows where people do that, and it's horrible. They have these horrible medical procedures just to keep them alive. So exercise is not good for you. Exercise is essential to humans and to every mammal. I think back when we were gathering our food in bushes and going out and having to hunt gazelles, I think exercise was just something you did.
That's right. It was a part of life, right? Yeah.
Right. But now you actually have to make an effort in the modern world to do things that all of our ancestors did generally, right? You've heard of the term sitting is the new smoking.
Yes. Yeah.
So sitting is actually really bad for you to sit for great lengths of time. So we have standing desks now. We go on a treadmill. I learned this recently. I was asking somebody who was a runner. I said, why do so many people, get all these problems from running? And they're, isn't running like a natural thing to do? And they said, yes, but humans for thousands of years ran on grass or dirt, which gives way and is cushion compared to pavement, which does not give way with your weight. Even maybe a big truck might ripple it a little bit. So that's why we've invented all these shoes to try to keep us from breaking our micro-fracturing our shins, or whatever on the cement. So it's like these things that we take for granted in the modern world actually to make us more comfortable or more safe can actually be killing us both mentally and physically. And in fact, I read recently that people that exercised, and I don't mean that you have to go to the gym and join CrossFit and buy Lululemon clothes and get a headband and a tank top. I don't mean any of that.
Decent people do. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I know. Right. That's true. But you just have to move yourself, 30, 40 minutes a day minimum to stay in any sort of, healthy shape. That the mental health is unbelievable difference. 30 to 40% better mentally that day from 30 minutes of exercise. It's crazy, your mood. So, and I noticed it. I didn't exercise this morning, but I did yesterday, and I could tell already I'm dragging. I'm a little bit more tired. So mental health hygiene is really, and then you said the 5 senses, paying attention. How many times do we actually pay attention to smell or sound? We might just be focusing on sight, right? So,
right.
And you said regulation. What is that? Can you explain what regulation is? Because I feel like that's
regulation.
a therapist
word. It's a clinical word, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, I think in some ways we're always regulating ourselves. This means like kind of helping ourselves to feel better, kind of helping ourselves to feel content. It could be stimulation seeking, right? Where maybe our brain is looking for something. So if it's bouncing a knee, if it's tapping, your finger, if it's, for especially for young kids, you got the case of the wigglies. You need to move your body somewhere. You shift positions in your chair. That's regulation. There's something even beyond the sort of conscious level that's saying, hey, like, move your body. This is getting uncomfortable. The blood flow is stopping. So regulation is just a way of saying, kind of like making yourself more comfortable, making a shift or a change to meet some kind of need in your body. And a lot of times we're not even aware that's happening.
Okay. So basically like monitoring how your body's responding to its environment
There you go. Yeah.
with
Yep.
temperature, but
And how
also
it's feeling
emotions.
inside. And yeah. Yep.
Okay.
That too. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So
And the emotional,
I think that's a rough thing to do. I think a lot of us don't want to do that. I think we don't want to know how we're really feeling. What do you think about that?
no, I think you're right. I think you're right. And I think there's this whole thing where, therapists say, "Hey, man, feel your emotions. Feel," which I do. By the way, I'm mocking. That's something that I say and something that I do. I also don't know that we need to be aware of our body sensations, which is something that I advocate for, and our emotions, which is something else that I advocate for. They're connected all the time. I think it's okay for us to take breaks and for us to check out, and for us to be distracted and to use distraction as a method. Sometimes the issue is, I think long term, it's helpful to have some awareness of body, some awareness of feeling, because when we don't, then that's when all these other sort of side effects can happen, right? So my anger is coming out in a sideways kind of way, or I'm angry all the time, but it's really about an underlying depression or a grief that I haven't touched on, or a loss that I just, have buried, that I've buried away. So anyway, so those are also, anyway, I guess that's that.
Yeah. Well, I guess where do people learn these things? Is this something we learn in therapy? Is this something you teach people how to do?
So I think, and interestingly, you were talking about, in old times and hunting and things like that. I wondered to myself if people just had more body awareness. I don't know. I'm not sure. It for sure is something that I try to impart on people, but it's not as if it's some magical thing that people can't do. It's something that is very natural. I think that's one of the reasons why, amongst other things, yoga has been such a popular thing over the last 10, 20 years, maybe probably longer than that. Because it's this way of reconnecting people with what they have been connected with, previously for such a long time, which is their own bodies, their own movement, their own sense of self, their own sense of ground, which I think is a big part of what I'm trying to share as far as, self-regulation, as far as good mental hygiene. It's like, am I in contact with myself? Do I know myself, not sort of only intellectually with the laundry lists of bullet points of who I am and the different roles that I feel, but do I feel myself from the inside out, from a body perspective? And if you do, or you do, much of the time, or you have access to that, then those are indicators that you're in more of a regulated state at those points and that you're doing something right.
Okay, that's good. And that's something people can learn to do on their own.
Yes.
Because you're right. I think it is natural, especially little kids.
Yes, absolutely.
They run all
right?
over the place. They're always like, I'm too cold. I'm too hot.
Yes.
I need more food. Like they naturally do. And I think then when you're growing up in society and going to school and work, other people are dictating the temperature in the school or the workplace, and they're dictating when you might eat.
Right.
They're dictating when you are allowed to talk out loud and when you're allowed to raise your hand or when you're supposed to be quiet. So I think then all of a sudden we're sort of like overriding what we know, right?
Yes.
And then it takes a while to understand what conditioning we've had. And I mean, some of the conditioning is good. I mean, it's not bad to say, that kids shouldn't just be like throwing stuff all the time and eating in class. Like that's probably a good thing. But we have to see that is a condition that has happened with us. And so
you're so right. You're so right. And with that, and there's this sort of mix, right? There's this mix of, with this conditioning, sort of, we'll call it like inhibit, right? So sit down, little Johnny, or it's too cold. Well, class is going to be over in 15 minutes, and so you sort of learn to tolerate. And there's benefit to that, but there can also be sort of I'll give you something to cry about, kind of messages where that are also inhibit, do not feel, do not address, do not talk about, that are in my mind more clearly on the negative side, where it impacts a person to then shut down emotionally, to then develop in a way where they do not relate to their emotions, which means, as far as I'm concerned, that they also then don't relate to themselves, and they have a much more difficult time knowing and understanding and feeling who they are from the inside out. If that has been, especially something that has been consistent in their lives, where it's sort of like, don't don't feel. Don't ask too many questions. Don't worry about how your body is feeling, or even in the case of sort of physical abuse, at a certain point you begin to check out from the pain because it's a survival tactic, and so you become disassociated from that.
Would you say then that is other people imposing their will on people becomes sort of a habit, and then the person doesn't possibly know why they do certain things, and that's them adapting to the situation, but it could be a negative adaptation or an adaptation that maybe doesn't serve them? Is that what I'm hearing?
No, sure, right, but in their environment, maybe it served them well, right? Or
Right.
so totally, Paul. And so, maybe it's like, hey, children are to be seen and not heard, right? Well, so that means I don't have a voice. And so then I'm just going to be quiet in this environment. And then perhaps the person grows up and their partner is like, hey, like, why don't you speak more, right? And then there's another example of, okay, so there's an adaptation that is not really serving that person anymore, and they have to sort of struggle and push through. Here's a moment where I maybe want to talk, but there's this heavy pattern of habituated inhibition of don't talk that I need to work. And that's what I mean sort of about these in the moment opportunities to change and do different, right? So there's all these pathways that have been formed in this case of don't talk, of say nothing. And I have to actively push against that discomfort, my impulse to stay quiet, then to use voice, and to do that on a consistent basis until that habit is formed enough that even if it's still uncomfortable for me to talk or to use voice, that I'm now in the practice of doing that.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds good. And that does sound like something you can find on your own, but also the therapy process can accelerate that because you have somebody in your corner helping you out. And oftentimes,
Absolutely. Yeah.
in life, relationships can be very complicated, which is why I like the therapy relationship, because it's complicated, but it's real simple. There's boundaries. We're not becoming your buddy. We're not coming out. We're not bringing our stuff as much as we can into the room unless it's to help you. And we're teaching you and we're trying to empower you and get you on your way, versus a family member or a relationship or a friend or a significant other may have a lot of other intentions with you. And those are hard to trust. And our only intention is to try to do the best thing for you. And that's why it's a service. And that's why it's something paid for by insurance and or cash, because it is a boundaried situation.
Yes.
This is an interesting one you were talking to me about, which is guilt as evidence of progress.
Yeah.
That to me struck me. I didn't understand that fully. Can you explain to me what you mean?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it fits in with all the rest of the stuff that we're talking about, right? So, maybe the easiest way is, let's say with this last example, right? So maybe it's whatever the training was, I'm not supposed to talk. I'm not supposed to have a voice. In somebody's early formative years, that tends to have a big bearing, on the rest of our lives. But we, can overcome things. Okay, so maybe when the person starts using their voice, there is this big guilt. Like I'm complaining, depending on what the family culture or what the person was sort of told when they spoke. I'm taking up too much space. I'm complaining. Whatever the sort of values were around silence, there may be a guilt about that. Oh, now I'm complaining too much. Now I'm putting my needs before the family. Now I'm being selfish, right? And so, and it's sort of challenging because then there's this big guilt. Well, I don't want to be selfish. I don't want to overshadow other people. I don't want to be selfish and take up space where somebody else, could have used that space for something, or someone else's time when other people maybe are more important, or they have more important things going on, or they're more hurt than I am. And so there's, there can be this guilt that is there. And then it's sort of reflecting, okay, so how much of this is trained into me based on my past experiences and messaging and family of origin or young adult life, and how much of that is serving me now, right? So if I continue to stay quiet, how does my partner know what I think, feel, believe? How do I form friendships? How do I advocate for myself? How do I defend and protect myself? How do I defend and protect other people if I don't have a habit of of using voice, right? So just using one example. It's not all about that one specific example about using voice, but that's sort of a springboard into what we're talking about, right? It's just as far as guilt. So now the person has guilt, right? Let's say they're using their voice more. The therapist says, "Hey, use your voice more. Look what's happening. Your relationship is falling apart. You are being a doormat. People are." But the client says, "Oh man, I feel so guilty about that, right? I just feel like I'm taking up too much space," and it's sort of like, well, maybe that kind of guilt is an indicator of progress in that case.
I see. So like we might feel guilty because we have changed against what we were maybe told we should or shouldn't do when we were younger, and that we adapted to that.
Yes.
And so, for instance, perhaps somebody worked at a ice cream store. This is actually a story my friend told me. They worked at an ice cream store, and they're making very little money an hour plus tips, and people don't really tip at ice cream stores. So anyway, and then that one day they said, "Well, hey, I'm going to go off to college. I have this scholarship, and I really want to, do this." And I remember they told me the story that this is when they're 18. Their boss took them out somewhere to eat some food and was like, "You don't understand the opportunity that I'm giving you. It's the opportunity of a lifetime to be a manager at this ice cream store. You could make this much money." And then they're 18 and they thought, "Oh, wow, that is a lot of money I can make," right? And the boss was sort of trying to make them feel bad for telling them, "Hey, I got to quit in August. I got to go off to college."
Right.
And then they remember thinking, "Wait a minute, this is ridiculous." And like they didn't want to tell the boss that day because they'd taken him out to get some food or some sandwiches or something. So then the next week, they told the boss, "Hey, so sorry, I got to turn in my notice like 60 days or 30 days from now. I got to go to college." And their boss was going, "Oh, you don't care about me. You don't care about the ice cream store. Don't you think about all these kids that come in here and get ice cream? You're one of my best workers I've ever had for the last 3 years." And this person I knew, he told me this. He's like, "I felt guilty. Like, man, I'm abandoning this poor guy." But then I was like, what the hell? I just came here to make a little bit of money scooping ice cream for the summer, the last 3 summers. I didn't want to make this my life, And now he's like an advanced programmer that owns his own like software company and whatever. But
wow,
cool. He felt guilty, and yet he did make progress because he realized he went to college, and he wasn't making $35K or whatever he could have made as a manager at the ice cream store, and he sacrificed a few years, but he was able to make his goal. But he had to he felt a little bit guilty because this guy kind of programmed him to be like, "I need you. My ice cream needs scooping," So like, that's a silly story, but I remember him telling me that, and we kind of had a good laugh about it. And the opportunity of a lifetime, he kept laughing about that. But in that guy's mind, his boss, he probably did think it was the opportunity of a lifetime because that's what he had done. He had become a manager and then eventually bought an ice cream store,
Right.
So that was his truth. But just because something is somebody else's truth doesn't mean it's your truth.
Which is a critical thing. And I love the story. Ice cream scooper position available with the potential for servitude. I mean, and in a broader way, boundaries. If we think about boundaries for a moment, oftentimes, I think early on when I was training, I was in school, in my internship. The boundaries lecture had this boundaries. Wow, you set boundaries and then people can't mess with you, and you set boundaries and all is clear, all is right with the universe. And I think what I didn't understand is that, it's still human nature, which is people get pissed off, people get disappointed, people get hurt, right? Just like this guy's boss. But it doesn't mean that your reality has to be the other person's reality. And in fact, a lot of times it's really doesn't help you if you have the exact same or you feel coerced to have the exact same reality as someone else. And there's something in your gut, in your body, there's that idea again, is saying, this isn't right. This not sitting right with me. There's something that I'm feeling that feels off about this. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's a hard thing. And I think that's why it's important we talk to friends and mentors and therapists about these sort of things so that we can understand what is going on, because there are people in the world that want to push your boundaries for a specific reason.
Mm-hmm.
And that reason is often some sort of control. For whatever reason they need control. That's their issue in the world. That's their
Sure.
what they're doing. So,
and sometimes I think there's good folks. I mean, I think, just briefly, I think we've all done that before, Paul. I think I've done that before.
Sure.
When someone switches something up in the relationship, or they set a boundary, and I'm like angry about it, or I'm disappointed, or I'm shocked, and it feels unreasonable. And then when I sit back, I'm like, no, maybe not. Maybe this is this person asserting themselves, or doing something different, and doing something that they need to do to take care of them. And maybe I lose something, or I perceivably lose something in that. Yeah. But it's good to just reflect on that.
I agree. I think we all do that sometimes, and that may, we might have an agenda. Sometimes we try to get rid of our agenda and just try to go with the flow. But I think if you only go with the flow, you're gonna be in some real trouble. But if you only have an agenda, you're also in real trouble. So there's a balance there, and that's something we talk about. So you talked about a couple of resources that you like, couple books. Can you tell me about these books? Two of the books you told me about were In an Unspoken Voice by Dr. Peter Levine and Getting Past Your Past by Dr. Francine Shapiro. Can you tell me about those books?
Yeah. So, forgive me, it's been a little bit since I've read them, but I remember the impression that so first of all, Dr. Peter Levine is the founder of Somatic Experience. So that was a training that I took. I am a Somatic Experience practitioner, but he basically lays out his theory. This is one of, he has a number of different books on Somatic Experience. And a lot of it is about regulation, and it's about healing trauma. And you can take a look at the book as far as, looking at his theories. But I think there's some really just good points where he talks about how human beings are animals, just like what you were saying. Human beings are animals. Our coping methods, the methods that we have to survive difficult situations, overwhelming situations, and then what happens when sort of our survival responses get stuck within us, and trauma symptoms, and what that looks like, and PTSD. So I think that's really helpful. And then Dr. Francine Shapiro is the creator of EMDR. And I think in that book, there's these sort of practical, straightforward ideas about, how to help yourself to relieve some of the things from the past. I also, I practice EMDR as well. And I think that's an incredibly powerful technique. They tend to be, some people feel like they're opposite. They're not compatible. There's a lot of people that sort of hang out in one camp or the other. And I struggle to divide. I think that there's really meaningful stuff and approaches in both of them. And I use both EMDR and Somatic Experience in different ways, depending on the person, depending on what is coming up in the room. But back to the book, there are just some I think simple things, almost overly simple, it seems like at first, just to help you to relieve some of the symptoms of trauma in the EMDR book.
That's great. So I'm going to be putting your links to your private practice in the show notes. I appreciate all your time today. Is there anything you want to leave the listener with, or a potential client, or somebody who just wants to learn more? Any final thoughts you have?
I guess one of the examples is like compulsive sexuality is a coping method. A lot of times for people, that's another thing. And that's something that I've had experience helping people to work through, or to come more into congruence with their beliefs and their values around their own sexuality. And using the approaches of Somatic Experience, oftentimes EMDR as well. That's something that I help folks with that I didn't mention before.
Excellent. Yes, I think so. So just to recap, you've worked in big treatment centers in multiple roles. You have worked at a group practice for many years, I think at least 6, and you work on trauma, addiction to substances, but also sexual addiction, and you have the somatic experiencing background, as well as the EMDR therapist, and you're a licensed professional counselor, and you work with individuals, couples, and families. Is that right?
True. Yeah, that's true.
Excellent. And currently you're in the middle of Phoenix at the Biltmore Wellness Collective, and you can check that out in the links, and people can just send you an email or give you a call, and that's maybe how they get started if they want to work with you.
Yes, that's right.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being my guest. I learned a lot, and I'm excited for everyone else to hear this.
Hey, great. Hey, Paul, thanks so much for the time and the space to talk about these things.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And there you have it. This has been another episode of the Intentional Clinician podcast. If you're enjoying this show, please share it with people you know. I would surely appreciate it. Or take just a minute to give us a rating on iTunes. As most of you know, I am passionate about preventing future violence in the United States. My colleagues and I have started a nonprofit called the National Violence Prevention Hotline, a 501c3 organization. We are endeavoring to gain funding and collaborators so that we can start a 24/7 hotline and chat line to reach potential perpetrators before they act violently. It is a bold effort to save lives and curb violence by working to connect with potential offenders while they are in the planning stages of violence, help to de-escalate them, and provide resources so that they can get appropriate professional help. The National Violence Prevention Hotline is looking to open up a conversation about violence in society, the causes, and the solutions. You can learn more by visiting our website, www.violencepreventionhotline.org. Join us online by signing our petition on the website, sharing the website with your network of people, donating to the cause if you like, and you can now even write your congressperson from our website with a simple form. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you are a therapist looking for ethical and excellent medical billing services, check out therapistbillingservicesllc.com. That's www.therapistbillingservicesllc.com. Billing services created by therapists for therapists. If you're looking for an EMDR International Association consultant, I am a consultant and I can provide you the 20 hours you need to become EMDRIA certified. I have groups online and in person, and I do individual consultation. Just send me a message at the website and I'll get back to you. If you want to get trained in EMDR therapy, check out the great training opportunities with EMDR Training Solutions. I've worked with them before and they are phenomenal, so register today. If you are in need of counseling, do not hesitate to make an appointment at a local counseling center in your area. You can also make an appointment with the excellent clinicians in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area at Health for Life Counseling and the Trauma Informed Counseling Center of Grand Rapids by visiting www.healthforlifegr.com. The recording you just listened to consists of the personal opinions of Paul Krauss and his guest, and while these are based on the literature they have read and the experience in their fields, this should not be viewed as a definitive opinion on any subject. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for treatment. If you're in a crisis, please dial 911 or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 988. You can also text 741-741 and a live trained crisis counselor will respond. Did you know you could support your local bookstore by shopping at www.bookshop.org? You can order from the comfort of your own home online while supporting local brick and mortar businesses near you. If you are a therapist and you are not a member of your national or local therapy organizations such as the American Counseling Association or the American Mental Health Counselors Association, please get involved. At least pay the dues. It will help the lobbyists in our field keep us from becoming gig workers. And of course, there's the bonus of increasing mental health education around the United States and helping people understand what counseling is and promoting best practices within our profession. Until next time, I wish you all a safe and peaceful week. Pleasure and kindness, whatever you do, in variation, pleasure in all, pleasure in humor, if it comes to you, take care.